Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is set to hold a round of talks in Turkey, meeting President Recep Erdogan and other top officials in a bid to reinvigorate the stalled peace process with Russia. Yet with Moscow declining to participate and the Trump administration taking a step back, are the current efforts doomed to fail? Joining us now is Stephen Moore, founder of Ukraine Freedom Project. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thanks. Great to be with you.
So what would you say can be gained from these talks beyond the efforts to conduct another prisoner exchange?
Yeah, well, as you point out, the talks have stalled. The corruption scandal here in Ukraine has caused ripples throughout Europe and the United States. And, it's just kind of a rough time right now. And so I think President Zelenskyy is just trying to do anything he can to get people interested in creating a peace program for Ukraine. And I think Turkey is a good place to go because it has been sort of you don't hear much about Turkey. In fact, the only thing you hear about Turkey is that they buy a lot of Russian petroleum. And so I think these talks are important.
Would you say that Turkey still has a role to play there? I mean, even after, right after the conflict started, they were trying to broker some sort of peace deal. Now, that ended with the infamous Istanbul Protocol, which was not exactly a success. But even later on, this is a country that maintains contact with Russia, while at the same time being a member of NATO. So would you say they still have a few cards left to play here?
Yeah, well, as you point out, last time that there was a meeting in Turkey, which was at the beginning of the war, what came out of it was, okay, let's do what Vladimir Putin wants to do. And of course, it didn't work. And Zelenskyy made the wise choice to keep fighting. And he's, when we started this war in 2022, nearly 4 years ago, everybody thought that the Russians would roll through in 3 weeks, and they have not. And but I think that there's been a lot of death and a lot of destruction, and I think people are ready for a negotiated peace. Although I don't think anyone is sure how long it will last. But as you point out, Turkey does have this role where they're a NATO member, and but they are close to Russia, and they're not quite as Hungary is almost a caricature. Whereas Turkey, I think, has some respect maintained.
Now, who do you think is mostly to blame for the fact that these peace talks are going nowhere, at least for the time being?
I think that the people to blame all live in Russia. Vladimir Putin. And Kirill Dmitriev is someone that has raised his head. And then, of course, there's someone who has not raised his head in a while, which is Sergei Lavrov. But the people responsible for the lack of action on a ceasefire are Putin and his team. He has... I don't know. I would like to find out what it is Putin says to American presidents, because if you recall, George W. Bush said, I saw into his soul and saw someone I could work with, and then you had Obama sending Hillary Clinton with a big red reset button, and then catching him in an off mic moment that said, or a mic on moment that said, where he said to Putin, "I'll have more flexibility with our missiles after the election." So he was going to give Putin what he wanted as well. And now Trump, everything's going Ukraine's way. And then Putin calls Trump, and Trump's like, yes, Vladimir, you're right. So I think it's all Putin, and then there's no one really stepping in to force things. And as you point out, Trump's taken a few steps back. So we did a poll that said American Republican voters, 2/3 of them think Putin's to blame, and only about 14% think that Zelensky's to blame. So it's clear where the problem lies. It's not clear what to do about it.
If I remember correctly, the late Senator John McCain once said that I looked into Putin's eyes and I saw three letters, KGB. Of course, I'm just quoting from memory there. Do you think that we need more people like that? And are there people like that in the current administration who have the ear of the president and who might say at a critical moment, look, this is what Russia is trying to do and we shouldn't fall for it?
Yeah, a lot of us that grew up in the Cold War, a lot of us that just Russia is the bad guy, regardless. There's a lot of people who don't have that memory of Russia, and frankly, there was 15 years or something after the Soviet Union when people thought Russia might be a country that could be part of the international community, and they weren't. They aren't. They're a culture that thrives on death. They're a death cult. And I think that one of the things we do is we educate Americans on that. And I just got a note from a very well educated author in his 20s who's written several books, and he said, I had no idea until I started talking to you how evil Putin is. And so and I think a big part of this is that nobody thinks that we're at war. I mean, we being the West, you look at Europe, they're slow walking everything. In America, as you point out, they've forgotten just how evil Putin is. So I think it's going to take something dramatic that's going to help people remember who the enemy is.
More dramatic than a war that's dragging on for its fourth year, that has claimed thousands of people and countless cities reduced to rubble.
Yeah, well, and in America, I go there, and people have a lot going on. There's people are concerned about their own domestic problems. Crime is a big issue. Healthcare is a big issue. Immigration is a big issue. And frankly, there's a dramatic war going on in the United States between the left and the right. And so it's difficult for people to focus on Ukraine, which they view as someplace very far away. And those people speak with funny accents. And, and I couldn't point to Ukraine on a map. And but what we found in our polling is that 92% of Republican voters were concerned about the Russian drone incursions into Denmark, into Belgium, into Poland, into Estonia, and so you can't get 92% of voters to agree on what time it is. So this is a big deal, and we've had balloons floating over the United States that the Biden administration couldn't figure out how to shoot down, and any number of unpleasant things can happen in the United States. And my view is we're in a global war right now, so something unpleasant, very unpleasant, will likely happen in the United States, which will change the attitude towards the war.
So now the United States has implemented sanctions against Russian oil companies, but you said that Europe is still slow-walking this. Could this be a problem? I mean, we had an appeal from the US President's envoy to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, who said that Europe should be more aggressive and that using frozen Russian assets would be a new, bolder phase. Can we expect this new, bolder phase anytime soon?
Well, yeah, I've been watching these things closely because, there's 3 or 4 people in the world who can get Ukraine the weapons they need. One of them is Donald Trump. The rest live in Europe. And one of them in Europe is Bart van de Wever, and he's the prime minister of Belgium. And, that guy is being dragged down the street, kicking and screaming his way to giving up these frozen Russian assets. And you know what? It's a great deal for him. In the short time they've had him, 3.5 years, they've taxed him for $3 billion, which is a lot of money in the Belgian government. And so, on one side of this is a cash cow where he's making tax money for Belgium. On the other side of this is, the possibility of angering Putin. So, he is just making up every excuse not to do anything with that money, and frankly, the Ukrainians have given them an excuse now, which is this $100 million money laundering scheme and kickback scheme that came out of Energoatom, the Ukrainian nuclear power facility. And so it's just a really bad time. There's a meeting in December that they're going to have among Brussels and the rest of Europe, where they're going to try to make Mr. Van de Wever do the right thing. And the preliminary meetings are not looking good.
And speaking of which, we have only 1 minute, unfortunately, but do you think President Zelenskyy will be able to overcome this domestic political crisis?
Well, he's got to handle it right. And how do we know if he's handling it right? Well, there's not several million people out in the street in Ukraine. So he's doing it right so far. But, it's just, there's a lot of us that are working really hard to help Ukraine, and to have this stupid, selfish own goal, where the Ukrainian elites don't want Ukraine. So who doesn't want Ukraine to win? There's people in the White House, there's the Russians, there's Bart Van de Wever, and then there's these Ukrainian elites that just keep siphoning money out of Ukraine. So it's really frustrating for those of us that are taking this on to have the Ukrainian elites cause all the damage to themselves.
Stephen Moore, founder of Ukraine Freedom Project, was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be with you. Look forward to doing it again soon.
And I'm You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and updates.